And I'm right, Chair.
Good evening, everybody, both councillors and officers, and now live. Welcome to this meeting of the Community Governance and Electoral Issues Committee. I won't go through all the housekeeping points because I think everyone's fully aware of what they should be doing, and hopefully there won't be a fire, so we should be all right. You have the agenda in front of you. My name is Oliver Ford and I shall be chairing the meeting. Item 1 is apologies for absence.
We have none, Chair.
Okay, and there are no substitute leave members attending, I believe. Item 2 is the minutes, and those are the minutes of the meeting held on 13th of September 2023. But he seems lost in the midst of time. Would anyone like to propose that these are adopted as a true and accurate record? Would anyone else care to second that? No. Councillor Lagova, get more formal. All those in favour, please show. That's unanimous. I don't think no one has any issues with them, obviously. Item 3 is declarations of interest. Has any member a declaration of interest they need to make us aware of? Item 4 is urgent business and chair's announcements. As far as I'm concerned, there are none. Item 5, public participation. Has there been any notification of public participation?
Just that Councillor Hayley Gascoigne wishes to address the committee this evening.
Thank you very much. We'll look forward to that, Councillor Gascoigne. Item 6 is an election of vice chair. Have we a proposer for vice chair?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose Councillor Max Thompson.
Thank you very much. Is anyone else wanting to second that?
I would like to second that.
Thank you to Councillor Gova. Are there any other nominations? Please can we therefore vote on that proposal and duly seconded. All those in favour, please show. That seems to be unanimous, including the new vice chair. Congratulations, if that's the right word, Councillor Thompson, and thank you very much for taking on this enormous burden. All right, so we now move on to the major part of the meeting. Item 7, the Local Government Boundary Commission for England review of Vale of Whitehorse District Council warding arrangements. You will have seen already that there has been a paper prepared by officers which has been circulated, and members have been given the option to comment on it. Officers very kindly prepared a summary of the representations to be made so far, and there's also a very helpful and revised map showing the various wards. The first thing to, at what point would we take Councillor Gascoigne?
Take Councillor Gascoigne now.
Would you like to speak now, Councillor Gascoigne?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Good evening.
Okay, hello. Shall I go ahead?
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, cool. Well, thanks for having me at your committee meeting today. I have circulated my comments, which I think is in the paper that you will have already seen, but just to back up my points, as I just put them briefly in your papers. So overall, I want to speak sort of in favour of the bit that affects my ward. So I represent Blueberry and Harwell ward, which currently includes the villages of Blueberry, Chilton, Upton and Harwell, as well as part of Great Western Park. So in the new paper, in the new suggestion, it's been suggested that my current ward, that me and Councillor Deborah Dewhurst represent, should be split. And I just want to speak in favour of that, because currently we're one of the greater variances. Our population has grown since it was last reviewed, and will continue to grow as the large development of Valley Park, which sits almost entirely within my ward and will be sort of 4,000 homes, so many new people coming to the area. So splitting it up in this way makes sense to me. So I do support that. I think that delivers equality for voters, as their votes will count. You know, they'll get a councillor representing them more fairly. One thing I wanted to also speak in support of was multi-member wards. Now, this hasn't been sort of explicitly talked about in the paper, but it's something I felt strongly about since becoming a councillor. The past, you know, I was elected not this time, but the time before, or both times, and I'm in a multi-member ward. And the good thing about that is that you have somebody else to work with. When you're a working person, as I am, this helps with splitting the workload. And although we represent more people, the fact that there are two of us to share some of the workload, and we have different strengths to bring to the role. So I think having multi-member wards is something I would generally be in favour of where possible. So perhaps where there are two wards that are single member wards neighbouring, it would, for me, make more sense if they were combined and were one larger two-member ward, as I think this is better for the voters, the people that are represented, as well as the councillor experience. So that could be in the case, for example, of neighbouring to me, where Blueberry and Upton are going to be split away, could be joined with Hendreds, for example. And then finally, although it's not officially part of this review, to review the boundaries of the overall district area, I think it would be useful to perhaps mention in the consultation feedback the fact that the natural community for where I represent, part of Great Western Park, actually is more closely aligned with South Oxfordshire and the surrounding Didcot, and the other part of Great Western Park, that is a natural community. So I think in some way this needs to be taken into account as perhaps future boundaries get moved. Yeah, so I think that is all I wanted to say on those matters. I support splitting the ward for better representation, but I am in favour of multi-member wards and supporting natural community boundaries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Gascoigne. I'm going to use the chair's prerogative to say that I'm also in favour of multi-member wards as well. Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, Councillor Gascoigne, thank you for joining this evening. I think we're going to get a lot of consistency with us being in favour of multi-member wards this evening. I guess looking at the way Hull and Western Valley are projected to be split from Blueberry, though, you know, obviously you're the member, so I'm just trying to work out what would make more sense here. Would it make more sense to have Hull, Western Valley and Blueberry as a three-member ward? Would that, if there was going to then be lines drawn or a reconfiguration of Vale and South in the future, would that make that easier? Or do you think that Blueberry and Hendreds, as you mentioned before, would make a more natural pairing if we, again, you know, we'll see where we go with this, but if we say we are much more in favour, as we may do, of multi-member wards, which one would make more sense, the three-member ward or a two-member ward with Blueberry and Hendreds, in your opinion?
That's a good question. I think it makes more sense with Hendreds because the Blueberry and Upton bit also includes Chiltern, and I do think Chiltern and you know its proximity is much more closely aligned with Hendreds. They're both Hendreds and Chiltern, for example, sort of are in close proximity to the Harwell campus. So that Harwell campus would then be in that whole ward, whereas today Harwell campus is partly in mine and Deborah's ward and partly in Councillor Sarah James's ward. So for me, it would make more sense if Blueberry, Upton, Chiltern was together with Hendreds, because I think they have, at least part of it has that proximity to Harwell campus almost being the centre point of that. The only other kind of natural community, I think, so Blueberry and Upton are closely aligned, but there's that thing of being close to Didcot, but where Didcot is in South, obviously we can't consider that. So to answer your question, although I think both suggestions are not bad ones, they're pretty good ones, I think Blueberry, Upton, Chiltern with Hendreds because of the whole campus thing.
Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed. No doubt. Please feel free to stay with the meeting.
Thank you.
We'll be lonely because you're the only person, councillor, who's actually attending, other than us. Are there questions, please?
Generally, or to Councillor Gascoigne?
No, generally.
Yes, I have a couple if possible. So I think that we've heard from Councillor Gascoigne, we've heard also from Councillor Border and myself that broadly speaking, I think that in terms of the overall council experience, things like being able to take over a councillor if someone is ill or if someone is away, multi-member wards might be a useful way to go. And I just wondered how much consideration had been given in drafting these wards to the creation of multi-member wards where we have wards with just one member sort of next to each other, as in the case of Blueberry and Hendred.
To be honest, none.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll come on, introduce paper.
Oh, sorry,
In a moment, but because we had no comments from members.
Yeah.
We, as building blocks, we use the current arrangements and then had regard to the electoral forecasts currently and going forward for electoral balance, and then looked at what we perceived to be community identity issues, which is one of the 3 factors which the Boundary Commission will look at. So you could have a large multi-member ward, but the Boundary Commission will very much be looking at community. And of course, parish councils are probably responding during this first stage of the review as well. So they'll carry quite a bit of weight. So we didn't really look as that as an issue when putting forward these proposals. That wasn't a factor.
I felt a slight slap on my wrist there, actually, and you're also guilty, Councillor Thompson. And perhaps I ought to give this chair business up, actually. But anyway, I should, of course, have asked officers to introduce the paper. I do apologise that I failed to do so.
Okay, so I'll briefly introduce the paper chairs. I'm sure members had a chance to read it, but as set out in the report, we're now at the stage of the review where the council has the opportunity to submit warding proposals to the local government Boundary Commission for England as per part of its review of the warding arrangement for Bale. I've got to emphasise it's not the council's review, it's very much the Boundary Commission's review, so they will make the final recommendations, final decisions. As I alluded to, the criteria for the review is set out in paragraph 3, and the summarise is to deliver electoral equality for voters, to provide boundaries that reflect natural communities, and to provide effective and convenient local government, which I think you could use the reasons that Councillor Gascoigne earlier mentioned for that 3rd bullet point. I would reiterate, and this isn't a slap on the wrist, but members were invited to submit ideas on warding patterns, but sadly none were received in the first call for ideas. So officers therefore drafted proposals, and we had regard to the current warding patterns. The previous review documents have very much looked at what was submitted by consultees and this council back in 2013, and we looked at the electorate figures going forward. So as it sets out in the report, there was a desire back in 2013 from this council to try and keep the urban areas separate as far as possible from the rural areas. So the Farringdon Grove wanted having them, so we very much had that in mind when we came up with the proposals that are before you. As the chair stated earlier, a revised map was circulated earlier today. Unfortunately, the map that went out with the agenda had the wrong boundary drawn for Wootton and March, and the actual description in the paper is correct. It's just unfortunate that Holden District references on GIS weren't correct, so it pulled through different lines. And also circulated, as Chair referenced, you should have a hard copy in front of you of all the responses from members to those draft officer proposals, and we tried to keep them in the headings that were corrected in the report. So for this evening, the committee is invited to comment, agree proposals. The original idea was to take these to council on Wednesday. We'll obviously have to see where we get this evening. Might have to revisit that. If there's proposals you want us to go back and, all right. That's it, Chair, unless there's any specific questions on anything.
May I just add that if members of the committee will recall that we proposed an increase in the number of councillors, and that was turned back by the Electoral Commission. However, the proposals that we have from officers actually increase the number of councillors by 1, and it's not impossible, if all these recommendations are taken into account, I think, that we might see a potential increase of 2 in the number of councillors, whether, of course, the Electoral Commission will want to play with that or not, I would like to say. The other thing I would say, first of all, I've been very impressed by the number of councillors who have responded, and that's very much appreciated. But I think we should start off by saying that I certainly recognise the amount of very hard work that's gone into the preparation of the paper. And I'd like to thank officers very much for having done that. It's very easy to, much more difficult, I think, to create the dartboard to throw darts at it, which is what was happening here, of course. So let me go back and ask again. First of all, are there any questions really to officers on the paper? Or are we all right at the moment? And secondly, perhaps we can go debate. I mean, we can, if you like, go through the comments that have been made by councillors. I think there are some major points that have been made by councillors. There are probably 2 areas. But it seems to me that we may wish to decide that we ask officers to redraft or amend, perhaps would be a better word, the paper that they've done to take into account comments from councillors wherever possible, and come back with a new version, and perhaps also to liaise with those councillors if there is an opportunity, who have made, particularly cogent points about what should be done. And that might be a better way. I mean, I certainly don't feel qualified to comment on the warding arrangements in Blueberry myself. In fact, I'm not sure until recently I could have found it on the map. So I'm not sure whether that would be a great way of doing, to go through all these things. But I'm obviously very willing to take suggestions. Would anyone like to comment perhaps on sort of the major issues that arise from this? Councillor Locoba.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, just I have a question, just because obviously we use here projected electorate for 2029. So just I wanted to ask, just what was used for calculation, just current developments or kind of any future potential developments, just what was the basic for?
Well, we use colleagues in policy to do all these up, so it would be for planning permissions that have been granted, looking at the local plan and projected housing developments, and all that information was submitted to the Boundary Commission, and then they submitted to us their projections based on that information. So they have a process to go through to see whether they think those houses would be deliverable. Probably looking, they'll have a lot of experience what other local authorities submitted, so they'll have a feel to what is realistic.
Thank you.
Councillors? Councillor Thompson.
Excellent, thank you. And yeah, and just to reiterate, thank you for all the work here. I'm aware that it's frustrating when people at the last minute come and say, well, what about this, what about that? But thank you very much for being able to answer the questions. I've got 2 which are just general about the report. I think the first one is, for some reason, I don't know whether it's specifically in the report, I was under the understanding that maybe it's from a previous report that 10% over or under the margin is sort of the goal, or nothing more than. And there are a few proposed wards here that will be over that or under that 10%. So Farringdon at 14, Grove at -15, Sanford at 14, etc. I just want to, of course, the percentage is only one factor, but are we fairly comfortable that we're not just going to have the boundary commission send it straight back and say, no, 10% is the limit? I just want to understand how rigid that 10% is.
They were looking back at 2013, and there were a number that were in that figure, plus or minus.
Mhm.
And I think as long as there's the argument on community identity, for example, Farringdon, which was similar to the previous review. So I think as long as you can use the argument, and you have those the 2029 figures, if you can argue that it makes sense because of community identity and effective local government, that's fine.
Is there a level we wouldn't go to, I guess, because I understand the community identity, is it to 20% would be the level?
If it's 20%, it comes up as a red on their spreadsheet.
Great, thank you, that's very clear. And then I've just got a second question, which is that this is dependent on us being able to increase the number of councillors by 1. Have we given any thought to what will happen if the boundary commission come back and say, no, 38 is your limit? Do we know where we're likely to cut? Or is that something that will be the next iteration of discussions?
They've made clear that because we've had discussions with our contact, and where there's an argument where it achieves electoral equality, then it's perfectly permissible. If you just came up with awards to try and increase it to get back to what the council wanted, 41, then yeah, they would come back. But if you can use a good argument, the reasons why there's a slight increase, 1 or 2, they would listen to.
Okay, thank you.
Could I just ask perhaps officers just to comment on the representations that have been received? Not in detail, but can you see a way, I suppose, is the question, to incorporate some of these representations in a redrafted paper?
Yeah, depending what the decisions are of the committee this evening. There are, for example, there seems to be quite a few views around Farringdon, Stanford, Ridgeway. We've had.
Yeah, we term it the Farringdon Revolt internally, actually.
Right, the Farringdon Revolt. So we haven't done the work yet, because obviously wait to see what the committee decided, but we can go away and put those figures in and come back. There are some views in here which, so for example, around Marcham, where there's conflicting views from current ward councillors. So one councillor expressed one view and it's contrary, where we're suggesting we retain the split of St Helen without the parish council. So we really need guidance on where we should go with that. But the especially around Farringdon Road, we can go away and look and come back and illustrate what would happen to the overall figures.
I think Councillor Thompson is just going to provide us with the answer. The answer is
no, I don't think that at all. But from my reading of this, and I agree, we shouldn't go through comment by comment. There are 3 major areas. One is around Farringdon, Kingston Bag Pews, and whether Farringdon should be a 3-member or Kingston Bag should be a 2. And so it'd be good to get further clarity from members there. The second is around this Grove, Ridgeway, Hannies discussion, where there seems to be some debate. So it'd be good to maybe have a possibly consider that and maybe reach out to the members who put that forward. And then I think there's a third area which has come up from some things that we've been said, which is if there is indeed a preference for dual member wards, and I'm fully understanding community identity needs to be protected as much as possible, when we're looking at the Marcham and Wootton discussion and there being an overlapping, that would seem like a fairly not straightforward. I don't want to say that because I don't know the wards myself, but they're neighbouring. There seems to be this issue, and I guess it would potentially be worth reaching out to the ward members at Marcham and Wootton to see, just to find out from them if there would be big objections to that being a dual member ward, which comprise both Marcham and Wootton. And I think that looking at where the sole member wards are, there seem to be 3 or 4 places where potentially there could be a good joining. It seems that Blueberry and Hendress we've heard about, Marcham and Wootton potentially, Ridgeway and Stanford, and potentially Drayton and Stevenson seem to all be places where there's a single member and there is some overlap in terms of, and so it would just be worth us considering those. And I would suggest that potentially, as a first step, reaching out to the members and seeing if they would think that was a terrible idea, because they might, because again, we are largely councillors from Abingdon, not entirely, but largely, and we're not in a position to make judgments about community identity there. But I do wonder whether the March and Wootton is a place where there would be some benefit in finding out whether that could be a dual member ward that was slightly larger. But I will now cease to monopolise the time.
Are you in a position, officers, to reach out to these groups of councillors to get their views on this, or?
Well, I think that one way if the committee was in agreement that we could take that as a recommendation, but report to council on Wednesday that the committee's recommendation was to have option for multi-member wards in certain areas.
Yep.
So it be brought to the wider council, so they'd be aware of it anyway, and then we could contact the local members afterwards.
So are we gradually working our way to a sort of proposal that says that thank you for the paper. I'm thinking of bullet points here. Thank you for the paper. Committee was very sympathetic to the representations made by councillors. Thirdly, committee was in favour of multi-member wards where possible, and therefore it decided to recommend that paper should be amended to incorporate as many of the representations by councillors as possible. Officers were asked, where necessary, to liaise with members where representations had been made and clarification was needed. Is that about it? Would that work? Something along those lines? Perhaps you could turn it into English then.
I got that.
I was speaking slowly, actually, not to help you, but simply because I was making it up as I was going along, of course. Is there further debate?
I think the only, from an officer point of
Oh,
view,
yes, sorry,
is that
where do you need further guidance?
well, the deadline for council submission is the 18th of March.
Yeah.
Now, currently, this is a council function, and this committee makes recommendation to council. I wonder whether the request that members would give consideration, better than I, whether council would be my delegate authority to this committee to draft or submit draft proposals direct to the boundary commission.
Following agreement by this committee.
Yeah, otherwise you're going to have a special council meeting between now and the 18th of March, which does reduce some of the time frame that this committee may have. It wanted to meet more than one more time.
That does seem quite sensible, but let me just take the views of other members. What do we think?
Can I get some clarity? So at the full council meeting on Wednesday, a recommendation we made to note this report and note the recommendations of this committee and to delegate to this committee responsibility for drafting and feeding into the, so I just want to make sure I'm clear with this, and that would then be possible to do purely in a meeting of this committee rather than by full council.
Yeah.
Correct.
So I am personally very happy for that to be made as a recommendation at full council, but also minded that it's possible that full council will determine that they want to be involved, in which case we would then have another council meeting. So happy for the recommendation to go, as long as it's something that isn't just noted, but is something that we can maybe debate at full council. Is that
I
possible?
think we put it as an open question rather than a closed question.
Yes, in that case, I fully support.
And I think if that were agreed, then at the next meeting, we'd authorise the chair to finalise the paper. go on to the boundary commission. It just gives,
Yeah.
in terms of the time frame, and it's only delegating this stage of the review. So when we get the draft recommendation from the boundary commission, it's still the council that would sign off the final document for response at that stage.
Well, I'm in support of that.
Everyone happy with that in principle? In that case, could I have a proposal? The proposal could be something like, I propose just what you've all just said. Or alternatively, perhaps we might ask you to give us an idea of what we might be proposing as second thing.
So I think from the discussion that I've heard is that you'll note the report. Recommendations to council will be that you're in favour of multi-member wards, and that you would encourage officers to redraft the report, reaching out to ward members where appropriate, and then ask for a delegated authority from the council to this committee to then submit the finalised report to the commission by the 18th of March.
That sounds right. I just think perhaps in order to help council on Wednesday, we might put another point in that the redrafted paper will then be circulated to members first before this committee makes its final decision.
All members.
Yes, to all members for their comments.
May I also just add that I think it's important that we note that committee is in favour of multi-member wards where possible and where it doesn't harm community identity. I think if we can just make that clear, then we're not just doing it for the sake of it, we're doing it where it's possible, because I'm sure there will be some entities, I don't want to pick on any right now, because again, I would not want to say that I'm exactly familiar with each one, but I'm sure there'll be some where a particular ward, it might be very appropriate for them to be a single member ward based on community identity.
The only other thing to say, Chair, is responding to Councillor Gascoigne's point about reviewing the boundaries between Vale and South Oxford. As she rightly stated, it's not part of this review. That's something that this council could consider, but it would have to have the agreement from the other council, South Oxford. So the Boundary Commission wouldn't consider any request for a review unless it had support from both councils, and they'd also expect a fully costed financial implications to show how it impacted on one another, the councils, if boundaries were changed.
Well, that would then, I think, be something that was separate from this review.
It would definitely be. It'd be a separate request, but
and
it would need the support of both councils.
I suppose in that case, the way to proceed would be for Councillor Gascoigne to propose that.
I believe there was a motion. I think it was about. Pretty sure it's about. While man or a question. Can't remember if it's a council or this committee. But I think if it was something that Councillor Gascoigne or this council want, then it should come by a separate motion to full council rather than as part of this review process.
Can I think Councillor Gascoigne is still online at the moment. So can I suggest that if Councillor Gascoigne wants to take this forward, and there's no reason as far as I can see why you shouldn't, it might be a good idea to speak to you, Stephen, about the best way of doing this and that. Would someone like to propose, if that's acceptable to everyone, that sort of slightly composite motion that we were talking about?
I'm happy to propose it.
Councillor Thompson, would anyone like to second it?
I'll second it.
I'll take Councillor Briggs on this particular occasion, because I think it's good to have a cross-party consent. All those in favour, please show. Carried unanimously. I think that concludes the business for the evening. My first meeting lasted 52 minutes. I'm glad to say this one